Okay. All right. I'm going to welcome everybody to another edition of Hoosier Roots Live. And so today we're excited. It is February, Black History Month. And so we have a special presentation which Vincent and Diane are going to share with us, Southern Indiana African American Research. And so this session focuses on the stories, records, community threads that have shaped African American life in Southern Indiana. So this is a conversation that opens the doors to understanding a part of Indiana's history that really needs to be more visible and deserves to be heard. So we're excited to have you both here. And so we're going to go ahead and start off with you guys. I would love for both of you guys to introduce yourselves a little bit before we start the presentation.
I'm Diane Stepro. I am the Family and Local History Librarian at Jeffersonville Township Public Library.
And I'm Vincent Thomas, Jr., and I am the Makerspace Training Specialist here at the Jeffersonville Township Public Library.
And we can get started whenever you're ready.
Yep, you can go ahead and share your screen. Bring the presentation up.
Okay. Like this, right?
That's it.
Okay.
There you go. You guys are off.
It's good.
Awesome. All right. Well, hey, everybody. Again, as we said earlier, my name is Vincent Thomas, and I'm joined by Diane Stepro. And we are here to discuss researching 19th century African-American ancestors in Southern Indiana, crossing the Ohio River in search for freedom.
So, we'd like to start with a brief history of people with African heritage in early Indiana, because knowing the history is going to tell you a lot about where to get the records.
Exactly. And I would like to give a quick disclaimer that during this presentation, we will use African-American, Black, person of African descent, person of African heritage, all interchangeably during this presentation.
Well, prior to becoming a U.S. territory, this area was already well settled for a very long time. Of course, first there were Native Americans, but before the formation of the United States, this was part of the French Empire. So French Canadians settled here, Spanish traders were here, there were Native Americans here living side by side with those people. And there were some English-speaking explorers such as Daniel Boone, who were known to have entered this region well before this became a U.S. territory. Those people came with those they enslaved. The enslaved in Indiana included people of African and Indigenous American heritages. And we don't know for sure, but we believe that some persons of African descent among the French may have been free, and some self-emancipated people may have lived with Native Americans in Indiana. So Black heritage can stretch back quite a long time. And that also means that you're going to have to go to places like the records that are held in Louisiana, because this was, believe it or not, part of the Department of Louisiana in New France. If you or Spanish, old Spanish records, or local records for the French settlements, if you have an ancestor that goes back that far.
Wow. So Indiana's been a part of, well, Indiana has been Louisiana, Kentucky, and Virginia.
Right. And while we're focusing on the 19th century, you may need to know these things to put all the connections together.
Right. Absolutely. So let's discuss the Northwest Territory. Let's set the year 1787, and this is a few months before the ratification of the U.S. Constitution. So the Northwest Territory, we're calling this area, Indiana, the Northwest Territory. It was established as an area free from slavery. Now, no law prohibited any male landowner from voting in this territory. Now, this is significant because this indicates that Black people may have voted during this time. And again, we said earlier that this area was established as an area free from slavery. However, those laws were routinely ignored or flouted with the use of long indentures for people of color. So indentures did, to a certain extent, ensure the freedom of descendants. And older textbooks will blame the French, but Southern families settled Indiana rapidly, often bringing enslaved people with them. So for context, I descend from enslaved Africans, and my last name is Thomas. That is not a French last name. But when it comes to, when we talk about the legacy of slavery here in this area, the French are often blamed, and that's not the full story.
And so you're not just looking for French in French names. Sometimes you will get that impression from Indiana textbooks, but you are not just looking for French names among the enslavers.
Exactly. So we do have some evidence of slavery here in Indiana. And right here, we have a manuscript of a will of Mary Provine here in Clark County, Indiana, which was dated August 26th of 1815. And here, Mary is naming her heirs. So she's naming her sons and daughters. But what is really significant that she names in here is she names a Negro girl named Jude, who was left to her in her husband's will. However, she wrote in her will when she got to Indiana that her dying request was that her children take no steps or make any attempts to bring Jude and her children into bondage, right? So this is significant because it notes the possibility that Jude could have been placed into bondage here in Indiana, and it was a concern of Mary's.
Yeah, so we don't really know how Mary treated Jude, whether she was indentured or they treated her as an enslaved person. We've been able to locate no local record of that, but we do know that she was concerned about what would happen to Jude next, and so that's a really interesting record. There are other records in the county of people that appear to have been considered completely enslaved right here in Clark County, Indiana, long after Indiana became a part of the Northwest Territory and should have been a free state, a free territory. So wills are very good for that kind of thing.
Absolutely.
In the very early statehood period from 1816 to 1831, you'll find all of this detailed more on our bibliography that we've included, and the Indiana in 1816 moved from being a territory to part of the Union as a free state. Under Indiana's first constitution, Black people had limited rights. They couldn't vote, but they could legally marry, they could own property, they could go to schools. Those are things that could not happen in every state of the Union. There were many states, in fact, in which people of color could not marry or could not learn to read and write, including marriage was illegal in the border state Kentucky. there was no legal avenue for Black people to marry. Courts ruled against slavery and involuntary indentures in Indiana by 1821, which caused a sort of a domino effect where people realized they could challenge those long indentures. In many cases, African Americans had indentures as long as 99 years in Indiana, whereas a typical indenture traditionally was 7 years. So that was, clearly against their will and not an agreement, as an indenture was supposed to be an agreement, a labor contract. The last federal census that found enslaved people in Indiana, this is a shocker, but it occurred in 1840. They found 2 people still in bondage at that time. You think about that the census takers asked that question in a state that was allegedly a free state. It's a little bit of a shock. And since Southern Indiana bordered Kentucky, which was a slave state that made a great deal of income by exporting enslaved people to the Deep South, there were certain things that were definitely true in Southern Indiana. A lot of people moved here from Kentucky with those attitudes. Kentucky had this reputation for being more generous to enslaved people than many other Southern states, but it was a major exporter of enslaved people.
Yes. So now let's get into the mid-19th century. So we're talking from 1832 to 1880. And the flow of humans worked mainly 2 ways. We have free people of color and self-emancipated people crossing the Ohio River on the way to the potential freedom in Indiana. And then we also have slave traders kidnapping people from Indiana to sell in slave states, such as Kentucky, right across the river. Black people in Indiana worked in a variety of fields. Some of the most common occupations were farming and working on the Ohio River, where both free and enslaved men could become or would become river pilots. Now, you also have industries such as bricklaying and blacksmithing that brought people specifically to Southern Indiana, and I'm sure all over other places of Indiana as well. Now, Indiana laws increasingly discourage Black settlement through discrimination and payment of bonds. And these bonds were set by state law and they were statewide. However, a few records remain of said bonds.
Very few state counties in the state still have their records of those, but they are available.
And here in Clark County, we do have the bonds available here at the Jeffersonville Township Public Library pertaining to Clark County.
Yeah. Now, Kentucky is really closely linked because of its proximity. We really find very few families in this area that don't have a Kentucky side or Kentucky roots. People move back and forth very constantly between Southern Indiana and Kentucky. So if you're in Southern Indiana, you probably have Kentucky roots, even as far north as places like Bloomington and Indianapolis, Vincennes, Terre Haute.
Absolutely. My family.
And possibly further north than that. So.
Right. So one online resource that it's an online local resource that is really great. I cannot stress the greatness of this database, but it's the Reckoning Radio online database. And what it does is it compiles oral histories of Kentuckians with African heritage, whether they participated in the WPA Slave Narratives Project. It indexes U.S. colored troops from Kentucky, and this is an ongoing project, so it is still being updated, as well as their index of Black church records in Kentucky. Like I said, it's an ongoing project. And they take on other research projects related to Kentuckians with African heritage. So I know they use the Charles Lemons Kentucky Enslaved Persons Registry, which I know that can be found at like the Nelson County Public Library, the full database. But they extrapolate information from that database, and you can search through the information on the Reckoning Radio website. It's really wonderful.
Yeah, it's got that weird name that doesn't seem to have anything to do with genealogy because it started out as a public radio project, but it's really amazing. We use it a lot because it indexes a lot of people who ended up and a lot of families who ended up on this side of the river on the Indiana side.
Absolutely. And it gives great information pertaining to our Kentucky ancestors.
So some of the Kentucky societies and libraries we found very useful are, first of all, the African American Genealogy Group of Kentucky, the Filson Historical Society, which is a historical society in Louisville that is dedicated to both sides of the Ohio Valley, family research on both sides of the Ohio Valley. So it includes Indiana records and Kentucky records and some Ohio records. The Kentucky Genealogical Society, the Kentucky Historical Society, the Kentucky Department for Libraries and Archives has been really useful for us. And the Louisville Genealogical Society and the Nelson County Public Library have all been very useful in our research into various families that have crossed the river. And all of those are detailed in the handout, the bibliography with the annotations. So feel free to contact us later if you need help getting a hold of a copy of that.
Yes. So, finding local records in Kentucky. Now, whenever you're searching for local records, there are certain records that you pretty much always want to check, or most of the time want to check. Let me not say always. So we have deed books, probates, and wills recorded enslavement and indentures, usually at county courthouses if they still exist. You also have church records, specifically Black churches. You have Congregationalist churches, Catholic churches, AME churches, Southern Baptist, Kojic. The list can go on and on. But you want to check these churches because churches keep great detailed records, oftentimes, of the people who attended, whether it was tithing records, attendance records, Sunday school records. Church records can be a great resource to check. You can also check plantation and farm records, and these may be digitized, held in libraries, archives, museums, historical societies, or even held by the enslavers' families. Plantation records are more likely to be preserved by wealthy or influential families. And you also have the WPA Slave Narratives Projects, where there was a project instituted where researchers went in and interviewed people in slaveholding states or border states and interviewed people who had formerly been enslaved about their experiences. However, please note that there are states like Louisiana that did not let the interviewers in to interview people.
But there are a lot of interviews, and I believe you've had some luck finding people in your tree.
Not people in my tree, but people who lived amongst my family.
Okay.
In my tree. So
those friends and neighbors are important.
Exactly, the fans method. Now, all of these records that we listed, like deed books, probates and wills, church records, plantation and farm records, you may find on Family Search or Ancestry.com. However, they are more often than not going to have all of the records. So if you don't see them on those digital databases, do not think that those records don't exist. You may have to just travel to that county's courthouse and check those out in person. Yeah.
So Indiana records are surprisingly organized, considering that they give evidence of enslavement and mistreatment in a supposedly free state. But since some African Americans trace back to the times of French Canadian settlement, it's really really worthwhile to consider the records in Indiana, even the very, very, very old ones.
Mm-hmm. And some great societies and libraries located here in Indiana are the Allen County Public Library. We have the Harrison County Public Library. We have the Indiana African American Genealogy Group, the Indiana Archives and Records Administration, the Indiana Genealogical Society, the Indiana Historical Society, the Indiana State Library, and the Knox County Public Library. And now the Harrison and Knox County libraries are important because they're located in post-state and territorial capitals. So they have great resources. They may have resources on your local county that your local library may not have. And while Allen County was not located in a state capital or was never a capital, they have a large genealogy center, which is really great for researching your family's history. And not only just researching Indiana history, but Kentucky and United States family research. So it's a wonderful facility.
So for local sources in Indiana, you're going to see a lot of the same sorts of laws that created records that you saw in Kentucky. You're going to see county deed books and wills recording enslavement and indentures. More likely in Indiana, you're going to see indenture, but we have found a couple of records, especially in wills, recording what looks like enslavement. We can't be sure that they weren't passing indentures on to people, but they often don't refer to an indenture. They often just pass on a human. You'll also find church records from Black churches, Congregationalist churches, and Catholic churches, and others. Some churches don't keep very good records, others do. And the deed books, wills, and church records are often going to be on Family Search, but you may have to go locally. You may have to contact churches to find out where their particular denomination deposits its records, especially if it's a closed church. You might have to contact another one of that denomination to find out where records go. But many church records are still extant. You will also find information in some local histories. Most Indiana counties have a county history, at least one. Some counties have several. And you never know what's in those, but many of them are indexed, so it's fairly easy to find out what families are there. There are also WPA slave narratives for Indiana, because we are a border state and many people entered Indiana once they acquired their freedom. And then we have the Negro registries, which are in some places inaccurately labeled as Negro birth records. The Negro registries are those registries of Indiana counties taking a bond of from a person who is a free person of color. And one great thing about them is, besides the name, they have a description of the person. Of course, it's horrible that people were required to pay a bond to live here. But horrible things in history often create nice records, unfortunately.
Unfortunately.
So.
Now, we wanted to give some examples of some families and some of our sources that we use when doing research for these families. So the first family that we would like to get into is the Thomas family. And again, my name is Vincent Thomas Jr. These are my ancestors that we are going to discuss here. So, like many African American families here in Southern Indiana, the Thomas family has had roots in both Indiana and Kentucky for generations. We've kind of gone back and forth. So the Thomases have lived in historically Black neighborhoods such as Claysburg and Lincoln Park here in Southern Indiana, and in Louisville, Kentucky. Our family has lived on Walnut Street, which is now referred to as Muhammad Ali. The Thomas family has belonged to African American or Black churches in Southern Indiana, such as First Trinity Missionary Baptist, Wesley United, and in Louisville, we belong to churches such as Mount Lebanon, Zion Baptist, St. Stephen Baptist Church. And actually, I was a member of St. Stephen Baptist Church, but I attended the campus in Indiana. So there are campuses in Kentucky and Indiana. That's just an example of how our ancestors went back and forth. The Thomases have been a part of organizations such as the Prince Hall Freemasons, the Order of the Eastern Star, the Progressive Club, and the women of our family were members of the Colored Women's Club here in Jeffersonville, Indiana. Now, because the Thomases were members of such organizations, you can find many entries of them in the local newspapers. And I was able to visit my local library and find these archived newspaper entries for free. So again, check your local library. It's a wonderful resource for genealogy. So here I made a chart regarding my family. So I have myself, my father, grandfather, great-grandfather, and so on and so forth. But one thing that I want you to notice is that I was born in Jeffersonville, Indiana. I've lived in Jeffersonville, Indiana my whole life. However, my dad was born in Louisville, Kentucky, but he attended school, married, and had children here in Jeffersonville. He was born in Kentucky, but his father was born in Indiana. And my grandfather's father was born in Kentucky. So we've had this back and forth of living in Indiana, but maybe some of us were born in Kentucky and lived in Kentucky. But one thing that I would like to point out is that though we went back and forth from Indiana to Kentucky, there's never been a real separation between my Kentucky ancestors and my Indiana ancestors. They fellowshipped amongst each other, still gathered amongst each other, visited each other, and even to this day, I have family members that live in Kentucky, and because we are so close, in such close proximity, we all live amongst each other still.
I find it interesting that there's such exact symmetry among 6 generations. One generation is in Indiana, the next is in Kentucky, back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. But this is really typical of what I see in the family history room.
Right.
People move a lot.
Exactly. And then one thing that I want you all to notice as well is my third great grandfather, Perry Thomas. He was born in Kentucky, had 9 of his children in Kentucky, but he had one of his children in Edinburgh, Indiana. So, and his son that was born in Indiana was born in 1876. So for generations, we've been going back and forth. It was just very interesting to find that. And some of the sources that I used in conducting my family's research are the US Census, the Freedmen's Bureau, obituaries, which can often be found in newspapers, US military records, and local yearbooks, which can often be digitized by your local library. Can you tell we're library employees? Okay, so let's start with my grandfather, who I call my papa, Clarence Thomas Sr., not that Clarence Thomas. But I knew that he attended a segregated high school because here in Jeffersonville, Indiana, the schools during his life were segregated. So I knew that he attended a school called Taylor High School. But at the time, I knew it was a segregated high school, but I never saw pictures of my papa in high school, or I never knew if he played sports or belonged to any clubs. But checking the local, my local library for the digitized yearbooks of Taylor High School, I found pictures of him. I found out he played basketball, that he was in the chess club. So it was a great resource, looking at those yearbooks. And then we'll get into his father, my great grandfather, Virgil Thomas. And an example that I used for him are military records. Military records are great because they can be incredibly detailed. Now, my great grandfather, I don't have any pictures of him, so I don't know exactly what he looked like. However, US military records can give us information like physical descriptors, aliases, next of kin. If they served in the Civil War, it can give us the names of their enslavers. If they were able to read and write, we could see their signature, like you can see of my great grandfather's on his documents. And you can search these documents on Family Search for free and the National Archives website. And if you can see on the registrar's report, and this is my great grandfather's registration card for World War II, by the way, I can see that his height, he was 5'6". He was Negro. His height was 5'6". I said that already. I'm sorry, you guys. His eyes were brown. His hair was black, and his complexion was dark brown. So while I may not have a picture of him and know exactly what he looked like through this document, now I have at least some physical descriptors, you know. So that's a great resource. His father, my second great grandfather, Rutherford B. Hayes, he was just commonly known as Hayes Thomas. I found him listed in newspaper archives, and I was able to use our local library to find these. And now what was interesting about him is I found out he was the president of what was the Progressives Club. And the Progressive Club was all about advocating for Black people politically here in Jeffersonville. So they would meet and organize and plan to be more politically involved and to advance the living conditions for Black people in Indiana. And I found that to be very inspiring because I didn't know that he was the president of an organization like that. So it was just empowering to know that that's what I come from. I also found his obituary in the newspaper, which listed his surviving family members, so the name of his wife, the name of his living children, the name of his siblings that were still living. And I also saw that he had 9 grandchildren and 13 great grandchildren. And just for perspective, me and my first cousins, I'm one of 10. So we've been a large family for many generations.
That tie is great.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And then here we have my third great grandfather, Perry Thomas, also known as Perry Hamilton. So these are more US military records, and he served in the Civil War. And records were kept on Black soldiers in the Civil War. Very detailed records were kept on Black soldiers in the Civil War, actually. And these records can be found on Family Search, afroamcivilwar.org, which if you use their search engine, it will redirect you directly to the National Archives website. It's just a bit easier to navigate than the National Archives website. And then we have Reckoning Radio again. But I would like to point out some of this information on this substitute volunteer enlistment form that I found through the National Archives website. So as you can see, I have Perry Thomas, also known as Perry Hamilton. In this volunteer enlistment, I have the enlistment of a Perry Hamilton who volunteered as a substitute for a man named Hans Hamilton. So my third great grandfather was paid to take the place of another man who was drafted into the Civil War. Now, what's significant is on a pension record for his service, I see Perry Thomas, alias Perry Hamilton. I had no idea that any of my family ever went by the last name of Hamilton. So this gives me more information to look into his possible family that he may have lived around. Was there a familial connection between him and the man who he took the place of in the Civil War? It can kind of just give you other avenues to start looking into.
It's just so amazing. So many of us struggle with ancestors that went by multiple names, but there you have it in black and white, exactly what his multiple names were. Yes. It's so great.
Yes, it is. It is. And yeah, so I wanted to show sources that I use to research my family history, but also to show you that I know that my family has been here in Jeff or in Indiana for generations, but I wouldn't be able to tell the full story of my family history only searching Indiana records. I had to go into Kentucky to tell the full story or a fuller story of my family history. Okay.
Now, I wanted to give a couple of examples that we've run into in the family history room over the years. First is the Hughes family. The Hughes family was found living in Charlestown, Indiana, in the U.S. Census of 1870, which I accessed via Ancestry on the 21st of January. So pretty common record that most people know how to find. And there, as I read along, I saw that James was listed as a Baptist minister. He lived with his wife, Emily, and 4 children. James was 50 in 1870, Emily 37. So I went to Reckoning Radio to find out what I could find out about the family. On reckoningradio.org, I found some enslaver information because James had been a soldier in the Civil War. So I didn't find the name of the enslaver, but I did find that he had been in Jefferson County. James had been in Jefferson County, that he was freed upon joining the U.S. Army, that he was born in Henry County, Kentucky, drafted at Louisville, and served in the U.S. Colored Troops, 123rd Infantry, during the United States Civil War. So this is a very important family to the entire nation. They live just a few miles from this library. But in 1871, they gave birth to a son, Nathaniel Hughes. Nathaniel's later moved to Joplin, Missouri, so the family stayed Midwestern for quite some time. And there in Joplin, he became the father of Langston Hughes, who is one of America's top poets, consistently ranked in the top 10, no matter who's doing the ranking among literary critics. So Langston Hughes has Indiana roots and Kentucky roots. So
yes, and before we get into our next example, because you showed the information that Reckoning Radio showed right here. So for my third great grandfather who served in the Civil War, I forgot to include that his enlistment papers indicated that he was free when he joined the Civil War. So, you know, that kind of gave me an inclination that, okay, now I need to research free people of color in Meade County, where he was born, to maybe find more information. And you can find sometimes information on free people of color in local libraries or historical societies. So our next example is of a man named Obadiah Buckner. Now, this case is very close to home to us. So, and a few history books do actually mention this case. So we have Obadiah Buckner, who was a prosperous farmer in Henryville, who attempted to board a train here in Jeffersonville, Indiana, probably in 1856. And he was denied passage because he didn't have his freedom papers. Now, why do you need freedom papers in a free state? That's suspicious. So he sued the Jeffersonville Railroad Company, but he lost. And he was ordered to pay all court costs. And his appeal to the Indiana Supreme Court was denied. So he challenged the railroad company and lost. So obviously there was a clear discrepancy on actually enforcing Indiana being a free state. Very little else is known about Buckner, except for his answers on the 1860 census. We know that he was born in Kentucky around 1808. He was illiterate, so he could not read or write, and he was married to a woman born in Virginia, and they had a house servant. And right here, we have a partial cover of the case file, Buckner versus Jeffersonville RR, Jeffersonville Railroad, 1856. And this cover of the case file is available through the Indiana Archives and Records Administration Courts Collection, emailed to our presenter, Diane, on September 14th, 2020.
And it actually, they have the whole case there in that collection, but I didn't think, you can't read it very easily, so I didn't put the whole thing on.
Gotcha.
But Buckner is especially dear to our hearts here because the railroad station is on the same block as the library, and the station is no longer physically present anymore, but its space is right next to the local history room.
Yes.
And
absolutely.
so he became a civil rights hero. He certainly did fight, even though he didn't win.
Right. And then that is to be
Right here.
commended.
Sorry.
I was just saying that's to be commended.
Yeah.
I have deep respect
Yeah.
for Obadiah Buckner for standing up for what is right.
So
we know that he left no will. However, other wills and probate records here in Clark County, Indiana, do mention him. Like, for example, we know that he was denied payments of debts from the estate of a William McClintock in 1862. And if you search the last name Buckner in the U.S. Census, many Buckners, both Black and white, show up in Hart County and Louisville, Kentucky. So this suggests that local records here in these counties or or in these parts of Kentucky might reveal more about Obadiah and his family and maybe some of his experiences.
Now, one more example, the Mukes family is a very large Indiana family. There are some of the Mukeses have Mukes descendants have become rather famous, but there are several different Mukes families. It's not clear how they're all if they're all related or just freed by the same will, but they were freed and they were granted money, land, and farm implements by an 1830 will. And the will instructed them to try to find land in a free state and get away from Kentucky. So a couple named Reuben and Frances Mukes moved from Kentucky to Floyd County, Indiana, and purchased a farm there. Floyd County is another county that borders the Ohio River. Deed information found in Floyd County, Indiana deed books, and you could find them with the courthouse search or through family search, and they show the purchase of the land by the couple. Fanny was 48 and Reuben was 60 when they appeared in the 1853 Floyd County Negro Registry, that registry of paying a bond that allowed them to stay here in Indiana. And he is described as light mulatto. She is described as brown. And I should note that those bond payments were supposed to finance another thing that created records, the Colonization Society. So they were to finance moving any African Americans who would volunteer to do so from Indiana to Liberia. And there is a record that is on our annotated bibliography of all of the people that did take that offer and move. And there are extensive records of the society as well. Now, Fanny and Reuben, Fanny is Frances, Fanny is her nickname. Fanny and Reuben are mentioned in a lot of records, including census and marriage and death records and newspaper records. There are many, many descendants in this area. Fanny died in 1889. Actually, she was living in Cementville in Clark County, Indiana at the time. Papers inaccurately reported that she was the oldest person in Indiana. We know from her answers on other things, including the census and the Negro Registry, that she was not, in fact, 102 at the time, but the papers often thought she was. And this is the Floyd County ownership map, which you can find on the Library of Congress catalog. And there is the bottom of this map. There is the Silver Creek, which is a major tributary of the Ohio River. And right along the creek, there is a property belonging to the Mukes family, and that is their land. And that is it. Do we have any questions or comments?
Thank you. That was fascinating.
That was so much information, and I loved all the examples. And my favorite picture, Vincent, is your third great grandfather. Like
That's
that is
awesome.
my favorite picture. I love that one.
So can I share with you all, what if I told you all that I actually have his original document from being discharged from the Civil War?
Do you really?
Wow. My goodness.
That is amazing.
That's neat.
I want one of those.
I liked how that like Diane mentioned, how born in Kentucky, born in Indiana, born in Kentucky, back and forth and back.
Happens all the time.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just his family.
Yeah.
We don't have any questions. You guys threw a lot of information out there, though.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah. So, and
Yeah, I know.
and we did kind of come with the assumption that people already could find census records and newspaper records and that kind of thing. But we hope that people will take a look at the annotated bibliography, and there are a lot of places where you can get records and places where you can find out more.
Well, and I think it's very important for the African American community because I think they think I can't find anything. And you guys have both, especially Vincent, have proven like there's lots of ways of discovering, it's not always going to be happy stories, but it's stories, they're people, they're connected. And so that's what I feel is so amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then, what's awesome is she taught me something about the Hughes family, and I grew up with the Hugheses, and I had no idea that they were kin to Langston Hughes.
Oh, wow.
And my family grew up with the Mukes family. So, yeah.
But you got your family back quite a ways.
I have into the 1700s.
Yep. So
Oh my goodness. That's terrific.
That is.
And thank you for sharing the resource Reckoning Radio.
Oh.
yeah, it's an amazing resource. They are going, sending volunteers to index National Archives records of the U.S. colored troops, and they started with Jefferson County, which is where Louisville is, and they're branching out through all of Kentucky. So they're very focused on Kentucky, and that's in northern Kentucky first. So that's great for Indiana.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you guys so much for this.
Thank you for having us. This was my first presentation, so I was a bit nervous.
You did fantastic.
You did great.
You
You did great. Let's see here. So I just had some IGS announcements to share. Our annual conference is coming up April 17th and 18th in Plainfield, Indiana. Registration is coming soon, so keep an eye out for that. Also, the call for nominations has gone out for the IGS Board of Directors. We're seeking outstanding candidates. And these are the positions that are open: president, vice president, corresponding secretary, the northern tier district directors, so that's the Northwest, North Central, Northeast, and then also the West Central District Director and the East Central District Director positions. So if you are interested, you just need to be a member in good standing, and send in a current resume or your CV and a written statement, which could be in an email, that you agree to run for the position, to nominations at indiegenes.org. And our committees. We also need some chairs and members on our team. And these are what we have open. More of an urgent need, I guess. Because if you're interested in any committee, reach out to us. But right now we do need a chair or co-chairs for the Indiana County Genealogist Committee, and members to help. The Lineage Society Committee, we need a chair and members. The Membership Committee, we could use some members. The Nominations and Elections Committee, we do need 2 members. The Publications Committee, we need a chair and members. And we also need an IGS historian. So if you are interested in any of those committees or any of the other committees, and you can find those on our website, reach out to Allison Singleton, the IGS president, at president@ndgs.org, and she can give you more information. We are doing the 250 for 250 campaign. It's a fundraising, it's kind of part 2 of a fundraiser, for the Veterans Bounty Land Records campaign through the National Genealogical Society. So part 1, we collected over $20,000 and have donated that to NGS. And this is the second part, where we're hoping from each of our 92 counties, $250 for a total of $23,000 can be donated to NGS when they visit Fort Wayne in May for their annual conference. And we already have some counties who have reached the 250, but we still have a little ways to go on that. But I just wanted to share that. If you want to make a donation, you can use the donate button on the IGS website. And next week, we have our IGS Writers Special Interest Group meeting at 6:30, and it's on Zoom. So if you're interested, just reach out to publications@ndgs.org to sign up. And I send out the Zoom link the day of or the day before. And we also have a private Facebook group also. So the annotated bibliography for this presentation, oh, it's not a county, it's an account. IGS members can sign into their IGS account and then visit the document library. And it's the first handout we have. So thank you very much for sharing that, Diane and Vincent. And we appreciate that. And hopefully we can build that in our library. And if you're not a member, you can reach out to Diane Stepro at her email, and she'll share it with you. And if you are a non-member, consider joining the IGS team. We would be happy to have you. And our next Hoosier Roots Live is Tuesday, the 3rd of March at 6:30 Eastern Time on our YouTube channel. And after the recording, we'll take this link and share it on the IGS Facebook page. So it will live on YouTube indefinitely. And I think, oh, thank you for being a part of Hoosier Roots Live. I forgot I had that slide on there. It's kind of autumn-like, but yeah, we thank you for being here and spending a little bit of your evening with us and learning more and hearing a fascinating presentation. I'm going to stop sharing that.
Thank you
So
for
yes.
Yes, thank you so much.
Absolutely. This was fantastic.
We appreciate it.
Yes.
Okie dokie. Well, I am going to close down our YouTube recording, and we will see you either next week or next month.
Sounds
Bye,
great.
everybody.
Have a great night.
Take
All
care.
right, thanks.